The empire of the galactics extended over the grandeur of stars, engulfing entire planets and solar systems, molding them to its will. The sleek, massive ships of the empire patrolled all areas of the galaxy with a frightful presence. Nobody dared to oppose them, since doing so would mean obliteration. The empire ruled for centuries through overwhelming technological dominance, and they had become comfortable with their position at the top. It was unthinkable that anyone, particularly those from a species on Earth-like backwater planets, could ever present a genuine threat. Earth, long the target of the Empire's derision, was known for its comparatively outdated technology. At best, it was seen as a curiosity and a slight irritation. At worst, the Empire dismissed life on Earth much like one might disregard a gnat, a small nuisance. A brief evaluation of Earth had found that its growth lagged by centuries. Their spacecraft, when compared to the rest of the galaxy, were laughable. Their weaponry was antiquated. Earth was insignificant, no more than a bug to the Empire's grand vision. Arrogance was deeply ingrained in the Empire's complacency. They believed themselves unbeatable. What they couldn't have imagined was that while their eyes were focused on larger dangers and expansive systems, Earth had been working in silence. Scientists, engineers, and military leaders had spent countless hours creating new weaponry, new ship types, and technologies far beyond the Empire's understanding, all done covertly, far from the scouts and spies that pried into the planet. The Empire laughed at Earth's representatives in galactic forums. They mocked prototypes and sneered at the latest vessels humanity offered, likening them to relics of the past. Whispers of Earth's alleged advancements were dismissed. After all, what could humanity possibly do? How could they, with their outdated technology, challenge the might of the Empire? And yet, there were some alien species who watched Earth from afar who began to believe otherwise. They saw promise in humanity's unrelenting attitude and refusal to bow under galactic disdain. But the Empire remained blind, their arrogance unyielding. In covert research facilities scattered across Earth and its colonies, something extraordinary was born, a new ship sleeker, quicker, and more nimble than the Empire's bloated war machines. The ship used cutting-edge technology, plasma drives, quantum energy sources, and shift capabilities. It was armed with weapons capable of tearing through the fabric of space itself. The ship was called the Vanguard. Humanity knew they couldn't reveal their achievements too soon. They needed to test the Vanguard discreetly, far from the Empire's prying eyes. The plan was simple. The Vanguard would venture into the periphery of imperial space, posing as a standard scouting vessel. To the Empire, it would look like nothing more than a small, insignificant human ship. But those on board knew the truth. They were bait for an empire that couldn't resist stomping out what they saw as a minor annoyance. It didn't take long for the Empire to respond. A small patrol fleet was dispatched to capture the human vessel. 3 ships were enough to take down the fleet in the first evening and thus secure the property for the crew, but that unit would be very limited, and more than enough, they thought, to send humanity scurrying back to its tiny blue planet. The transmission reached the Vanguard. The crew knew what was coming. Without a word, the ship slipped through the blackness of space, its engines humming with a ghostly grace. From the outside, it appeared to be an unremarkable ship. Inside, the crew worked with quiet precision. They weren't there for glory or recognition. They were there to prove something, not just to the Empire, but to themselves. The Imperial fleet arrived, their arrogance on full display. Massive warships armed to the teeth loomed over the Vanguard. A transmission came through, the voice of the Imperial commander dripping with contempt. "You are in breach of Imperial space. Surrender or be annihilated." The crew of the Vanguard exchanged glances. No one spoke. The captain gave a single nod. The ship's engines roared to life, and in an instant, the Vanguard shot toward the Imperial fleet. Plasma weapons from the Empire's ships lit up the void, but the Vanguard danced through the onslaught with impossible precision. Years of engineering had made the ship agile and near impossible to hit. Then the Vanguard fired its first shot. A single, calculated blast tore through the shields of the late Imperial cruiser. The explosion was instantaneous, reducing the ship to debris. The remaining 2 Imperial ships hesitated, their crews stunned. This wasn't supposed to happen. Humanity wasn't supposed to be capable of this. Panic set in, orders were shouted. Plasma cannons fired again, but the Vanguard was already moving. It weaved and dodged, striking again. Another Imperial ship exploded. The final ship turned to flee, its engines straining against the void, but there was no escape. The Vanguard closed the distance, weapons locked on target. The Imperial vessel surrendered without a fight. For the first time in centuries, the Galactic Empire had been defeated by a single human ship. The Vanguard didn't linger. It turned and slipped back into hyperspace, leaving behind the shattered remains of an Imperial patrol fleet. No celebration erupted among the crew, there was no need. They knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would retaliate. The battle wasn't over, not yet. But today, Earth had sent a message to the galaxy. Humanity was no longer a species to be ignored. The Imperial ship had already started sending out distress signals, desperate for reinforcements. The people were aware that Imperial Command would receive the communication quickly, but they had made their calculations. The technology at the forefront was far more advanced than the Empire had anticipated, and the people were assured they could outsmart any prompt action. However, the people were not yet finished. The Empire had to recognize the full scope of what they were up against, and that meant striking one last blow before the crew of the Vanguard prepared to retreat. Their movements for the upcoming strike were composed, controlled, and carefully organized. Long before now, they were executing the plan perfectly. Meanwhile, on board the remaining Imperial ship, panic spread. The Imperial commander barked orders in an attempt to recover some semblance of control, but his mind was racing. He desperately sought a way to prevent his crew from suffering the same fate as the others. Deep down, however, he realized the truth. Humans had exceeded them in every conceivable way. The Vanguard initiated its final maneuver. The strike was precise, leaving no room for error. But instead of obliterating the Imperial cruiser as they had with the others, the Vanguard chose an alternative route to destruction. The Imperial ship's engines and weaponry were disabled, rendering it powerless. It was clear now that Earth wasn't simply about annihilation. They could dominate the battlefield with precision. The Empire, so accustomed to overwhelming its adversaries with sheer numbers and firepower, was now facing a smaller, seemingly less sophisticated human spacecraft that had effortlessly dismantled their fleet. This defied logic, and it terrified the Empire. An Imperial spacecraft, now disabled, drifted in space. The crew on board was humiliated and left helpless. The Vanguard's crew knew this was more than a combat victory, it was a triumph of perception. The aura of Imperial invincibility had been shattered. Word of this loss would spread quickly. Other species, long oppressed by the Empire, would hear of what happened here today and realize the possibility of defeating their oppressors. The Vanguard had sent its message. It was time to retreat before the Empire could organize a more substantial response. Its engines roared to life, and in an instant the ship vanished into the depths of space, leaving the fragmented remains of the Imperial fleet behind. On board the remaining Imperial ships, the damage was assessed. One brutal truth was undeniable. Earth, once ridiculed and dismissed, had proven itself capable of far more than anyone had anticipated. The Empire would regroup, plot, and organize its retaliation, but now they understood they could no longer dismiss humanity. Earth had emerged as a formidable force. Back on board the Vanguard, the crew stayed focused. Although their victory was decisive, they knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would target them, bringing everything it had. But the people were ready. They had spent years preparing for this moment. As the Vanguard sped through the stars, the crew reflected silently on their achievement. They had faced the Galactic Empire's might and prevailed. This victory wasn't just for them, it was for all of humanity. The Empire's reign of terror would no longer go unchallenged. The galaxy would rise just as Earth had risen. The devastation of the Imperial fleet sent shock waves across the galaxy. At first, reports were dismissed as exaggerated. No one believed that a single human ship could defeat 3 Imperial vessels. But as more information surfaced, the undeniable truth emerged. The unthinkable had happened. Earth, a planet long regarded as technologically backward and strategically irrelevant, had dealt a devastating blow to the Galactic Empire. The Empire's leadership was in disarray. The Emperor, who rarely involved himself in daily fleet operations, was furious. How could his prized battleships, developed as symbols of the Empire's dominance, be vanquished by a species they had ridiculed? He demanded answers, but none of his advisors could provide any. The energy readings from the Vanguard defied understanding. Its speed and maneuverability outclassed anything the Empire had seen. Within the Empire, divisions began to form. Some demanded swift retaliation, advocating for the full might of the Imperial Armada to be unleashed on Earth. Others were more cautious, fearing that a premature war with Earth could expose even more vulnerabilities. For the first time in generations, fear crept into the Empire's leadership. Earth, once dismissed as inconsequential, was now a subject of fascination and dread. What if this defeat wasn't an anomaly, but a sign of something larger? On Earth, the mood was one of cautious hope. The Vanguard's success had united humanity in a way few had anticipated. National rivalries faded as people realized the stakes. They weren't just fighting for Earth's position in the galaxy, they were fighting for survival. Behind closed doors, Earth's leaders and scientists worked tirelessly. The technology that had powered the Vanguard was only the beginning. New weapons, faster ships, and advanced defenses were already being developed in preparation for the inevitable conflict. The galaxy held its breath. The Empire, still reeling from its loss, had not yet responded. Rumors swirled of its next move while whispers of rebellion.